You might have heard this rumor, the healthcare system's problems are large and they're linked. So I'll be kind of brief because I know as I look around this audience, I see all of you know at least as much about this as I do. But I will my formulation of the three problems is this. Value for dollar, that is to say, we spend about twice as much as the OECD average countries. We spend far more than any other country per capita, and yet life expectancy is right around 28th. If you do life expectancy after 60, which some would say is more comparable because after all we have all this uninsurance problem and Europe doesn't, we're all the way up to 21st. So if you look at overall system performance, the World Health Organization ranks us 37th, right between Slovenia and Costa Rica. These are countries that should beat us at soccer, not compete with us at healthcare. So there's something really wrong with our value for dollar. Second, basically mediocre and highly uneven quality. It is true if you're going to have a heart attack, this is the place to have it. We're very good at that. We're very good at neonatal intensive interventions. But on average, Americans get what they should get from their doctor in the doctor's office, about 55% of what we know to be effective. About 55% of the time they get what they should get. And it's also true, given all that low value for dollar, we're doing a heck of a lot of stuff that's not adding value, and we're not doing stuff that we know does add value. So mediocre quality and uneven quality is the second big problem. And the third big problem, of course, the one that is motivating, I would say, crescendo in the presidential campaigns upcoming, is inequitable access to care. We'll talk about the uninsured. We can argue about how many there are. Roughly 45 million probably go without health insurance for a full year. Roughly 85 to 90 million will be uninsured over a couple-year period, so it touches a lot of different people. But the shorthand way of understanding this is that essentially what we're doing at the moment is rationing access to care by income. And fundamentally, most of us think, in fact, most Americans think, that's immoral and therefore it needs to be fixed. There are a couple ways to put a human face on that. I just came from Denver, where I spent 2 days with the Blue Ribbon Commission trying to redesign the Colorado healthcare system. And what happens when you go out and do these public meetings is you meet people from the public. I highly recommend it. It should probably be done in small doses, but nevertheless it is useful. And I met a woman who just, came up to me and said, I want to tell you my story, and told me about her brother, an adult, who basically died of appendicitis. He went to the hospital uninsured. They gave him a little antibiotic, and he went home, and it ruptured. Now, I'm pretty sure the attending didn't think he was going to die in the next 24 hours, but the attending also knew he was uninsured and also knew that the budget was getting tight, and so he took a chance. And that's what happens. The Institute of Medicine, you may know, a few years ago, after a great study. Now, you all know about the Institute of Medicine. It's a wonderful institution. They typically assemble the learned sages of the healing arts, and they meet for a couple of years and write really long papers with lots of footnotes and appendices, and typically, frankly, conclude there's not enough evidence to reach a conclusion. So when they reach a conclusion, it makes news, and this really did, because they concluded, like the story I just told you, 18,000 Americans die every year for lack of access to health insurance, and that lack of health insurance prevents them from getting access to care. Now, out of 45 million uninsured, you could say that's not all that many, but I submit to you it's a far higher price than you want to pay. And what really motivates me personally, just as an aside, if you go back, if you believe the 18,000 number and you go back to the decline of the debate over the Clinton plan, and Reed's right, I do have lots of scar tissue over that, but I would say if you do the math from 1994 until 2007, multiply by 18,000 per year. If we had told this nation 250,000 Americans were going to die because of lack of health insurance, maybe, just maybe, we'd have had a different outcome, but maybe not, I don't know. But I think we're going to talk about it in a serious way coming up in '08. So the problems are serious, they're large, and they're linked. You can't really solve one without the other. That's why you need comprehensive reform. But, one of my favorite philosophers is Winston Churchill, who famously said of Americans, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. I think it's unambiguously true that in health care we've tried incremental reform now for roughly 200 years, but really seriously for the last 80, and we failed miserably to improve our system. So we've got to have comprehensive reform. One of the things I drew from the Clinton experience is that comprehensive reform has to be bipartisan. That's why I came to New America 2 years ago. They're committed to that principle. It has to be bipartisan for a couple of reasons. You know, a lot of what I do, I would submit on a daily basis, is try to foment bipartisan conversation against my country's will. It's a hard thing, you know. But I will take a note here to notice yesterday's Senate Finance vote on the S-chip bill, after all the hoorah, 17-4. Sports fans, that's progress. We will take this as evidence of growing support. So my problem in healthcare is that, of course, some Republicans feel compelled to pretend to believe things that are not true, and a fair number of Democrats clearly want things that cannot be. And my job in comprehensive healthcare reform is to piss them both off every day, but keep them talking to each other. And I think that is what New America's committed to. You might have heard we got to have 60 votes. So whatever you may think about the philosophy of it, there's got to be bipartisan agreement, or it ain't going to get out of the Senate. But more importantly by far, if only one party's representatives support a particular approach to reform, the American people are not going to trust it. So you've got to have genuine bipartisan buy-in to this thing. Okay, what does bipartisan health reform really mean? It means that both sides have to see core elements of their vision, of their narrative about how to get at this system, and to how to get at reform, to how to see this system evolving over time. On the Republican side, it seems clear to me that means individual responsibility, that means choice, that means markets. All those things have to be there. On the Democratic side, it means it's got to take care of everybody, and in particular, it's got to protect the low income and the high risk. And if it doesn't do all those things, you're not going to get bipartisan support. So that is precisely the sort of marching orders, if you will, into which we entered this process of constructing a health care plan that we think can appeal to the broad majority of Americans and actually advance the nation's debate and arguably the system. So it's built on two principles: personal responsibility and shared responsibility. By personal responsibility, we mean, consistent with the citizen-based focus, we mean individuals are responsible for their own health. They have to take sit-ups and broccoli and all that stuff quite seriously. And they have to be responsible for seeking health care when appropriate, so that they indeed get professional advice when they need it. And finally, in order to do that in a real world, you're going to have to be responsible for acquiring insurance. You're going to have an individual mandate to require people to buy insurance or to acquire insurance in some way if they're eligible for subsidies of various degrees. But you can't just put all the burden on individuals, and I think that's where a lot of the rhetoric around individual mandates discussion has gotten distorted. We would never propose doing that without shared responsibility very cohesively built in. And by shared responsibility, basically I mean making personal responsibility possible. There are three big elements here. One, there must be a new market, and that market must work for all, not just for the sellers and not just for some of the buyers, but for all of the buyers. And that means there's got to be serious risk pooling. There's got the simplest way to convey a prototype of it would be the current Federal Employees Health Benefits Plan, FEHBP. We envision the markets being organized on a state basis, but if you think about a state like California, you might want 3 or 4. That's okay. They're quite different. California is actually at least 2 nations, maybe 3. Okay, and if you think about those little bitty states like the Dakotas, maybe they want a pool, since there are only 27 of them anyway, and it won't really matter. But insurance companies will actually like it better if the pool is bigger. It's okay to allow states to choose to do this. But the point is, there's got to be a market open to all that works for all, which means serious insurance reforms. I already mentioned the individual mandate. You know, a mandate will make the insurance market work better. This is often a subtle point that is somewhat controversial on some sides of the political spectrum. But increasingly, more and more people are coming around to see it, because I think they read Thomas Jefferson as well, who said, you know, sometimes we must accept an evil in order to avoid a greater evil. And in fact, if you think about a mandate, it is hard to tell Americans they've got to do it, but if you don't, insurance markets don't work near as well, because adverse selection or the proclivity of those who need resources a lot to seek health insurance and those who are not healthy to stay out. That problem, that adverse selection problem, will make your market very hard to function.